Mother, what in God's name are you doing here? Serafina said. She didn't want you around. The words spat with Elias's usual blend of disdain and panic slammed into Rowena's chest, stealing her breath, leaving a bitter tang of steel and dust on her tongue. Her knuckles white from the 15-hour drive clenched around the handle of her worn leather travel bag. But even as the humiliation burned, a quiet hum started in her ears, the faint echoing promise of a fraudulent hospital bill, a secret weapon she hadn't yet consciously acknowledged, but knew was hers to claim. The hum had begun 3 weeks prior, masked by the false warmth in Serafina's voice. Rowena, the baby's due any day now, and we'd simply adore for you to be here when he arrives. You're going to be such an amazing grandmother. The shift from Rowena to Mother Rowena had been subtle, unsettling, like the whisper of a rattler in dry grass. In 5 years of marriage to Elias, Serafina had never been demonstrably affectionate, their interactions typically a polite, cool dance around the boundaries of familial obligation. But the sheer joy of impending grandmotherhood, the thought of holding her first grandchild, had clouded Rowena's usually sharp judgment, silencing the tiny, nagging voice of skepticism. At 65, Rowena had dreamt of this moment since Elias announced the pregnancy 8 months ago. The sonogram photo, a blurry smudge, had taken pride of place on her kitchen fridge in Phoenix, a beacon of hope, after years of quiet solitude. Elias and Serafina lived in Denver, a daunting 15-hour trek across endless desert highways and treacherous mountain passes. It was a journey she undertook with the fervor of a pilgrim. She'd carefully packed her best outfits, selected thoughtful, soft gifts for the baby, a cashmere blanket, a tiny silver rattle, and splurged on a week at a respectable hotel near Denver General Hospital. This wasn't just a trip. It was a sacred rite, a passage into a new, cherished chapter of her life. The drive itself was a testament to her resolve. The Arizona sun beat down, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage, then gave way to the stark beauty of Utah's crimson canyons. Her old sedan, usually reserved for grocery runs and bridge club meetings, hummed a steady rhythm across the vast expanse. Her back ached a persistent throb beneath her shoulder blades, but every mile peeled away the fatigue, replacing it with a fresh surge of anticipation. She'd stopped only for gas and lukewarm coffee, calling Elias twice to check for news. Both times, Serafina had answered his phone, her voice syrupy sweet, urging Rowena to drive safely, expressing feigned eagerness for her arrival. The calls, instead of reassuring, left Rowena with a faint, uneasy chill, like the desert wind cutting through a thin jacket. She pulled into the hospital parking garage at 2 a.m. on Tuesday morning, a skeletal moon hanging low in the winter sky. Exhausted but exhilarated, she felt an almost childlike elation. The maternity ward receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, directed her to Serafina's room, 314. Rowena practically floated down the sterile hallway, the scent of antiseptic doing little to quell the hopeful pounding of her heart. Then she saw Elias. He was pacing outside room 314. His broad shoulders hunched, a tangle of anxiety and what looked like genuine fear etched onto his face. The moment his gaze snagged on hers, his expression shifted, morphing from stress into something akin to stark panic. The question he barked, "Mother, what in God's name are you doing here?" wasn't just a slap. It was a physical blow, reverberating through her weary body. "What do you mean?" Rowena managed her voice thin and reedy. "Serafina invited me. She called and said she wanted me here for the birth." Elias's eyes darted nervously toward the delivery room door, then back to his mother. He looked like a man trapped between two impossible choices, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool hospital air. She changed her mind about having family here. She wants it to be just us. The excuse felt rehearsed flimsy. "But I drove 15 hours, Elias. I'm here now. I'm not asking to be in the delivery room just to be nearby when my grandson arrives." The desperation in her own voice was humiliating. "I know, Mother, and we appreciate it, but Serafina's really adamant about this. You know how emotional she gets." And the doctor said stress could complicate the delivery. His gaze skittered away, unable to meet hers. The deflection, the careful avoidance of her eyes, confirmed her growing suspicion this wasn't Serafina's sudden change of heart. This was planned, orchestrated, a deliberate exclusion. But Rowena was too bone-weary and too shocked to wage war in a hospital corridor. "Fine," she said. The single word, raspy and quiet. "I'll go to my hotel and wait for your call." Elias's immediate sigh of relief, audible even in the hushed hallway, was a stinging confirmation of her fears. He looked profoundly grateful. And in that moment, Rowena understood she was being systematically, intentionally pushed out. "Thanks, Mother. I'll call you as soon as the baby's born. Promise." "All right," Rowena replied, turning away before the tears could betray her. She walked back through the maternity ward, the hopeful bounce gone from her step. Each footfall heavy with bitter disappointment. Rowena spent the next 8 hours in her hotel room. The meticulously packed outfits still folded, the baby gifts untouched. Her phone, a lifeline, felt heavier than a stone, vibrating every 10 minutes as she compulsively checked for messages. The city outside her window, shrouded in pre-dawn grey, offered no solace. When Elias finally called at 10:00 a.m. Wednesday morning, his voice was thick with exhaustion, yet underscored by a profound happiness. "Mother, he's here. Silas Elias Caldwell, 7 pounds 2 ounces. He's perfect." A pang of fierce, protective love shot through Rowena, momentarily eclipsing the hurt. "Congratulations, honey. When can I meet him?" Another pause, longer this time, filled with the static of unspoken evasion. Serafina's really tired mother. The delivery was rough. "Maybe give us a day or two to settle in." Rowena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She was begging for scraps of connection from her own family. "Elias, I'm his grandmother. I drove 15 hours to be here." "I know, and we appreciate that. But Serafina needs to recover. You understand, right?" No, she didn't understand. Not really. But what choice did she have? She agreed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She spent 2 more days in that sterile hotel room, ordering tasteless room service and watching mindless daytime television while her son and his wife bonded with her grandson in a hospital a mere 3 miles away. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. Friday morning came and went with no call, no text, no invitation. The silence was a deliberate exclusion. Finally, Rowena's patience, always a finite resource, snapped. She drove to the hospital herself, a steely resolve hardening her jaw, determined to at least see her grandson through the nursery window. That's when she discovered they had already been discharged. She called Elias immediately, her voice trembling with a fury she rarely allowed herself to show. "You took the baby home without even telling me." Mother Serafina wanted to get home to her own space. She's been really anxious about germs and visitors. "I'm not a visitor, Elias. I'm your mother. I'm Silas's grandmother. I know that. Look, maybe next month when things settle down." Next month. She had driven 15 hours across 2 states to see her grandson. Next month. The words echoed in her mind, absurd and infuriating. It was in that moment, standing in the empty hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly overhead, that Rowena made a decision. A decision that would change everything. She hung up a cold, quiet resolve settling over her, packed her bags, and turned her sedan back toward Phoenix. If they wanted to exclude her from Silas's birth, if they wanted to humiliate her and deny her fundamental connection to her family, then fine. But they would learn that actions, particularly those steeped in deceit, always had consequences. Sunday afternoon, the telephone rang. The caller ID displayed Denver General Hospital. Is this Rowena Caldwell? A clipped professional voice on the other end. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we have some paperwork issues regarding the birth of Silas Elias Caldwell. The insurance claim was denied, and we need to discuss payment arrangements for the delivery bill. Rowena's heart started pounding a rapid, almost frantic drumbeat, but not with anxiety. No, this was a different kind of tremor. A thrum of something profoundly satisfying, almost delicious. She suppressed a smile. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some confusion. I'm not responsible for that bill. Our records show you as the financial guarantor for Serafina Caldwell's delivery. And that was when Rowena realized exactly what her dear daughter-in-law had done. While she was driving across 2 states, navigating snowstorms and exhaustion, desperate to be present for her grandson's birth. The pieces, sharp and venomous, clicked into place. Ma'am, according to our records, you signed financial responsibility forms for Mrs. Serafina Caldwell's delivery. Rowena sank heavily onto a kitchen chair, the cool plastic unforgiving against her thighs. Her mind raced, sifting through the layers of deceit. When exactly was this form signed? Let me check. It shows here that the forms were submitted electronically on November 15th at 11:47 p.m. November 15th. That was the night Rowena had been driving through the middle of nowhere, Utah, probably around the time she stopped for gas near Salt Lake City, the biting wind whipping at her hair. She'd been on the road for 8 hours, exhausted, her entire focus on reaching Denver safely on her grandson. And how exactly were these forms submitted? Electronically through our patient portal. The signature appears to be yours, Mrs. Caldwell. The picture became sickeningly clear. While Rowena had been white-knuckling it through a sudden snowstorm on I-70, her back screaming in protest, desperate to reach Denver. Before Silas arrived, Serafina had been meticulously forging her signature on financial documents. Not just forging, but leveraging Rowena's very presence, her hope and vulnerability against her. I need to see these forms. Can you email them to me? Rowena's voice was now utterly devoid of emotion, flat and cold. Certainly. What email address should I use? 20 minutes later, Rowena was staring at documents that made her blood boil. Not only had Serafina forged her signature, but she had somehow obtained Rowena's social security number address and other sensitive financial information. The forms explicitly stated Rowena was the maternal grandmother and had specifically requested to be financially responsible for the delivery as a gift to the new parents. Except Rowena wasn't the maternal grandmother, she was the paternal grandmother. And Serafina's own mother lived in Seattle, a fact Rowena knew well. The most infuriating detail was the timestamp these forms were submitted, while Serafina was sweet-talking her on the phone, professing excitement for Rowena's arrival, knowing full well she planned to stick Rowena with the bill, while systematically excluding her from actually seeing her grandson. The sheer audacity of it left Rowena breathless. She called the hospital back, her finger punching the numbers with deliberate precision. This is Rowena Caldwell. I just reviewed the financial responsibility forms, and I need to report fraud. Fraud, ma'am? The billing representative's tone shifted immediately, a new wariness creeping in. First, I never signed these documents. Second, I am not the maternal grandmother as stated on the forms. Third, these were submitted without my knowledge or consent, while I was driving to Denver at my daughter-in-law's explicit invitation. Ma'am, if you're alleging fraud, I need to transfer you to our legal department. Perfect. Rowena's voice was a steel trap. While she waited on hold, she pulled out her phone and began documenting everything, screenshots of Serafina's texts, inviting her to Denver, call logs, showing the timing of their conversations. Even photos she'd taken during her drive with GPS timestamps, proving her location when the forms were supposedly signed. Every piece of evidence was meticulously gathered, a silent testament to Serafina's premeditated betrayal. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Lyra Hayes from the legal department. I understand you're disputing financial responsibility forms. I'm not disputing them. I'm reporting identity theft and fraud. I have irrefutable evidence that these documents were forged. For the next hour, Rowena provided Ms. Hayes with every detail of Serafina's deception. Her voice calm, precise, methodical. They were particularly interested in the fact that Serafina had invited Rowena to Denver while simultaneously committing fraud in her name. Mrs. Caldwell, this is indeed a serious matter. We'll be filing a police report and turning this over to our fraud investigation team. In the meantime, all charges to your name are suspended pending investigation. After hanging up, Rowena sat in her kitchen staring at her phone. Serafina had played this perfectly, a meticulous, cruel game. She'd gotten Rowena out of the way during the birth, secured her private family moment, and planned to stick Rowena with a $300 bill as a final bitter insult. What Serafina didn't know was that Rowena had spent 35 years as a medical billing administrator before retiring. She knew exactly how hospital fraud investigations worked, how quickly they escalated, and she knew Serafina had just committed several felonies, not just a petty slight. The game was far from over. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elias' mother. Hope you made it home safely. Serafina's doing great, and Silas is such a good baby. We'll send pictures soon. Pictures. After excluding her from his birth and forging financial documents in her name, they thought pictures would smooth things over. Rowena typed back her fingers, moving with a deliberate calm she didn't entirely feel. Glad everyone's healthy, looking forward to meeting him soon. What she didn't mention was that she had just spent the afternoon ensuring that Serafina's fraud would be thoroughly investigated by both the hospital and local law enforcement. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting people face the natural, inescapable consequences of their own actions. Tuesday morning brought another call from Denver General, this time from Detective Blackwood with the Denver Police Department. Mrs. Caldwell, we've been assigned to investigate the fraud case you reported. We need to ask you some questions. Of course. Rowena, sipping her morning tea, felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through her. Can you walk me through the timeline of events leading up to the alleged document forgery? For the next 45 minutes, Rowena provided Detective Blackwood with a detailed chronological account of everything that had happened: Serafina's saccharine invitation, the grueling 15-hour drive being turned away at the hospital, the subsequent cruel exclusion from seeing her grandson, and finally the discovery of the fraudulent financial responsibility forms. She spoke without emotion, a calm recounting of facts, allowing the weight of the evidence to speak for itself. Mrs. Caldwell, do you have any documentation supporting your version of events? I have text messages, call logs, photos from my drive with GPS timestamps and hotel receipts, proving I was traveling when the forms were allegedly signed by me. We'll need copies of all of that. This is shaping up to be a clear case of identity theft and fraud. The fact that the perpetrator invited you to travel while committing crimes in your name suggests premeditation. Premeditation. Serafina hadn't just made a desperate decision in the heat of the moment, as Elias had implied. She'd planned this entire scenario, the invitation, the exclusion, the fraud. All of it had been meticulously calculated to humiliate Rowena while saddling her with their medical bills. Detective, what happens next? We'll be obtaining warrants for financial records, hospital surveillance footage, and digital evidence from the submission of these fraudulent forms. If our investigation confirms what you've told me, your daughter-in-law will be facing several felony charges. After ending the call, Rowena felt lighter than she had in days. Not because she reveled in the thought of Serafina facing criminal charges, but because finally someone was taking this seriously. She wasn't being paranoid or oversensitive. She had been the victim of a cold, calculated crime. The world was beginning to tilt back on its axis. Her doorbell rang that afternoon. Through the peephole, Rowena saw a woman in her 30s, dressed in a sharp blazer, holding a manila envelope. Rowena Caldwell. Yes. I'm Lyra Hayes, investigator with Denver General Hospital's Fraud Prevention Department. I have some documents for you to review. Ms. Hayes handed Rowena the envelope and waited patiently while she opened it. Inside were printed copies of the security footage from the night the fraudulent forms were submitted. The screenshots, crisp and damning, showed Serafina at a computer in the hospital's family lounge, her head bowed over the keyboard, typing on their patient portal system. Mrs. Caldwell. These images were captured at 11:52 p.m. on November the 15th, approximately 5 minutes after the financial responsibility forms were submitted under your name. There was Serafina, clear as day, hunched over a laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her focused expression. The timestamp confirmed that Rowena was still 4 hours away from Denver, somewhere in the desolate beauty of the Utah mountains, almost certainly with no cell service. What happens now? Rowena asked, her voice steady. The evidence is overwhelming. Hospital fraud is a federal offense when it involves identity theft across state lines. Your daughter-in-law is looking at significant jail time and financial penalties. As Lyra Hayes drove away, Rowena sat on her front porch, watching the Arizona sunset bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. A week ago, she'd been a hopeful grandmother, driving across the country to welcome her first grandson. Now she was a victim of identity theft, and her daughter-in-law faced federal charges. Her phone rang. Elias's name appeared on the screen. "Mother, what the hell did you do?" Elias's voice was shaking with anger, but underneath, Rowena detected something else. Fear. "Hello to you too, Elias. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. Don't play games with me. The police showed up at our house this morning with a warrant. Serafina's been arrested for fraud. They said you pressed charges." Rowena settled back into her porch chair, watching a roadrunner dart across her front yard. Its movements quick and decisive. "I didn't press charges, Elias. I simply reported identity theft when the hospital called asking how I wanted to pay Serafina's delivery bill." Silence on the other end, thick and heavy. Then quietly, "What delivery bill?" "The $10,300 bill for Silas's birth that your wife stuck me with while you two were playing happy family without me. Apparently your insurance was denied, honey. That's why the hospital called me. Serafina made me financially responsible for her delivery while I was driving through Utah to see my grandson, who I was then not allowed to meet." Another long silence. Rowena could practically hear the pieces clicking together in Elias's mind, the carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. Mother. There has to be some explanation. Serafina wouldn't do something like that, would she? The disbelief in his voice was tinged with a desperate hope. The same woman who invited me to drive 15 hours for the birth. Then had you turn me away at the hospital door. The same woman who's avoided every one of my calls for the past week, claiming to be recovering. Rowena paused, letting the words hang in the air. She forged my signature on legal documents, Elias. There's security footage of her doing it. This isn't a misunderstanding. She heard Serafina's voice in the background, shrill and panicked. Elias muffled the phone, but Rowena could make out fragments of their conversation. Serafina, claiming it was all a mistake, that she'd only put Rowena's name down as an emergency contact, that she never meant for Rowena to be responsible for the bills. Mother. Elias came back on the line, his voice strained. Serafina says this is all a misunderstanding. She put you down as emergency contact, not financial guarantor. Elias. I've seen the documents. I was a medical billing administrator for 35 years. I know the difference between an emergency contact form and a financial responsibility agreement. Your wife committed fraud. Jesus Christ. His voice cracked. Mother. What happens now? That depends on Serafina. Detective Blackwood told me that if she makes full restitution and admits responsibility, they might consider reduced charges. But Elias, she didn't just steal from me, she humiliated me. She made me drive across 2 states to be rejected at my own grandson's birth. then tried to stick me with the bill for the privilege. I know, and I'm sorry about that. But criminal charges? Prison? She just had a baby mother. Elias pleaded, the sound of Silas crying faintly in the background. And I just became a grandmother Elias. That didn't stop her from committing identity theft. Rowena's heart clenched at the distant cry. This should have been such a happy time, her first grandson healthy and perfect, and instead she was discussing felony charges with his father. "What do you want me to do?" Elias asked finally, his voice heavy with defeat. "I want you to be honest with me about what really happened." Did Serafina plan to exclude me from the birth from the beginning? Another pause, longer than the last. Then so quietly, Rowena almost didn't hear it. Yes. The confirmation hit harder than she'd expected, even though she'd known it to be true. Why? She said having you there would be stressful. That she wanted the birth to be just our immediate family. I am immediate family, Elias. I'm your mother. I'm Silas's grandmother. I know. I should have stood up to her. I should have told you what she was planning instead of letting you drive all that way. Yes, you should have. But you chose to protect her feelings instead of mine. And now she's facing federal charges because neither of you thought about consequences. Serafina's voice grew louder in the background, her desperation piercing the phone. Suddenly she was on the line, her voice thin and reedy. "Rowena, this is all a horrible mistake. I never meant for you to be responsible for any bills. I was in labor. I was scared. I just put down names on forms without thinking." Serafina Rowena said, her voice like ice. "You submitted those forms at midnight while texting me about being excited to see me. You knew exactly what you were doing. Please. I just had a baby. My hormones are all over the place. Can't we work this out as a family? We stopped being family when you forged my signature, Serafina. We stopped being family when you excluded me from my grandson's birth after making me drive 15 hours. Now we're just two people on opposite sides of a criminal investigation. You can't do this to us." "What about Silas? Do you want him to grow up without his mother?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. After everything she'd done, Serafina was trying to make Rowena the villain for reporting her crimes. "I want Silas to grow up with honest parents." Unfortunately, that seems to be asking too much. "Rowena, please. I'll pay the hospital bill. I'll do whatever you want. Just drop the charges." "I can't drop charges I didn't file, Serafina. The hospital filed them when they discovered the fraud. The police are pursuing them because you committed multiple felonies. This isn't about what I want anymore." Elias came back on the phone, his voice hollow. "Mother Serafina's attorney says if you don't cooperate with the prosecution, the charges will probably be dismissed." "And what exactly are you asking me to do, Elias?" "Just don't testify. Don't provide evidence. Let this whole thing go away." Rowena closed her eyes and thought about all the years she'd supported Elias. The college tuition she'd helped pay the down payment on his first apartment, the car she'd co-signed for when his credit was shaky, the countless times she'd put his needs before her own. Elias, your wife, committed identity theft. She defrauded a hospital. She excluded me from my grandson's birth after manipulating me into traveling across the country. And now you want me to help her escape consequences for all of that. She's family mother. His voice was barely a plea, more a desperate justification. "No, Elias. Family doesn't do what Serafina did to me. Family doesn't humiliate each other and then commit crimes to cover their tracks. So that's it. You're going to send Silas's mother to prison. I'm going to tell the truth when asked. What happens after that is up to a judge and jury." Rowena hung up the sound of the receiver, clicking, echoing in the quiet twilight of her kitchen. She sat in the deepening gloom, listening to coyotes howl in the distance, a primal sound that felt oddly fitting. Her phone immediately started ringing again. Elias's name flashing on the screen, but she turned it off. The sudden silence a welcome balm. tomorrow, she had an appointment with the FBI agent assigned to the case, and she had a chilling feeling things were about to get much more complicated. Because what she hadn't told Elias was that the investigation had already uncovered something else. Serafina's fraud wasn't limited to Silas's birth. The agents had found evidence of similar schemes involving at least 3 other family members over the past 2 years. Serafina Caldwell wasn't just a new mother who'd made some poor decisions. She was a serial fraudster, and Rowena's case was just the tip of the iceberg. FBI agent Vivian Hayes had the kind of calm, professional demeanor that likely came from years of investigating complex financial crimes. She sat across from Rowena in her living room, a thick, official-looking file folder resting on the polished mesquite coffee table between them. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to prepare you for what we've discovered during our expanded investigation into Serafina Caldwell's activities." Rowena had been expecting this conversation since yesterday's phone call from Elias. The raw desperation in his voice, the cornered sound, told her there was far more to this story than just her fraudulent hospital bill. "How bad is it, Agent Hayes?" Agent Hayes opened her file, the crisp rustle of paper loud in the quiet room. "Over the past 36 months, Serafina Caldwell has committed identity theft and fraud against no fewer than 6 family members across 4 states. The total amount stolen exceeds $47,000. Rowena's stomach dropped a cold, sickening lurch. 6 people. Your case involving the hospital bill was actually what broke this open for us. When we started investigating, we found a distinct pattern of Serafina obtaining personal information from family members and using it to open credit cards, take out small loans, and submit fraudulent insurance claims." Agent Hayes slid a document across the table. A timeline of Serafina's crimes, stark and damning. Elias's younger sister Ilara in California had $8,000 in unauthorized charges on credit cards Serafina had opened in her name. Serafina's own purported sister in Seattle had been stuck with a $5,000 emergency room bill that Serafina had somehow managed to transfer to her account. Elias's cousin Jasper in Texas had a $12,000 car loan taken out in his name that he'd never applied for. Did any of them know what was happening? Rowena asked, her voice tight. Most of them thought they were isolated incidents. A paperwork mix-up here, an identity theft there. Serafina was very careful to keep her fraudulent activities spread out geographically and temporally so no one would see the pattern. But people had to know something was wrong, Rowena insisted. They did. But Serafina was skilled at providing plausible explanations. She'd claim computer errors, clerical mistakes, or temporary financial difficulties that she promised to resolve immediately. She'd often send partial payments to keep victims from pursuing the matter too aggressively. Agent Hayes pulled out another document. The birth certificate fraud involving your grandson was actually the most sophisticated scheme we've seen. She didn't just steal your financial information. She created an entire false narrative about your relationship to the child to justify making you financially responsible. What do you mean? On the hospital forms, Serafina claimed you were the maternal grandmother and had specifically requested to be financially responsible for the delivery as a gift to the new parents. She forged your signature on documents stating that you were excited to cover all costs related to the birth. The audacity was staggering a punch to Rowena's gut. Not only had Serafina excluded her from Silas's birth, but she'd also concocted a fabricated story about Rowena's enthusiastic desire to pay for the privilege of being excluded. She told the hospital billing department that you were wealthy and had specifically asked to handle all expenses as your contribution to the family. That's why they called you so confidently about payment, while she was actually excluding me from meeting my own grandson, Rowena, finished the words, tasting like poison. Exactly. The cruelty of it is what makes this case particularly compelling for prosecution. It wasn't just financial fraud. It was psychological manipulation designed to maximize emotional damage while generating financial benefit for the perpetrator. Agent Hayes closed the file and looked at Rowena directly, her gaze unwavering. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to understand something. Serafina's crimes weren't impulsive decisions made under stress. This was a calculated pattern of behavior spanning years. She's stolen from family members who trusted her, destroyed relationships, and shown no remorse until she got caught. What happens now? She's facing federal charges that could result in 15 to 20 years in prison. The state charges for identity theft could add another 5 to 10 years. With 6 victims across multiple states and a pattern of sophisticated fraud, this is a very serious case." Rowena's phone had been ringing all morning, Elias calling every hour, Serafina's supposed mother calling from Seattle, even Elias's sister Elara calling from California. Rowena hadn't answered any of them, needing time to process this new horrifying depth of deceit. "Agent Hayes, can I ask you something? How did Serafina get all this personal information about family members, social media mostly? She was very active in family Facebook groups, birthday posts, anniversary celebrations. People post their birth dates, their children's full names, their anniversary dates. Serafina collected all of that information and used it to answer security questions when opening accounts. She used our own family connections against us. It's more common than you might think. Family members often have access to the kind of personal information needed for financial fraud, and they're usually the last people we suspect." After Agent Hayes left, Rowena sat in her kitchen staring at her phone. 23 missed calls, 15 text messages, all from family members who suddenly wanted to talk to her about Serafina's misunderstanding with the hospital bill. She decided to call Elara first. Elara had always been Rowena's favorite of Elias's siblings, and Rowena was curious about her perspective on Serafina's crimes. "Aunt Rowena, thank God you called back. Elias told me what's happening with Serafina and the hospital bills. This is all so crazy." Elara's voice was a frantic rush of words. "Elara, Agent Hayes told me that Serafina stole from you too. $8,000 in credit card fraud." Silence, then a hesitant whisper. "How did you know about that?" "Because we're all victims of the same person, sweetheart." "What did she tell you when it happened?" "She said it was a mistake, that she'd accidentally used my information instead of hers when applying for a card. She said she was mortified and promised to handle everything. She even made payments for a few months, but she never paid it all off." "No. And when you tried to pursue it, she got defensive and said you were trying to destroy her family over a paperwork error. Elias sided with her, said you were being vindictive." "Elara, that wasn't a paperwork error. That was identity theft. And it wasn't an isolated incident." Rowena spent the next 30 minutes, carefully, methodically telling Elara about the 6 victims, the chilling pattern of fraud, and the sophisticated nature of Serafina's crimes. By the end of the call, Elara was openly weeping. "I feel so stupid. I should have reported it immediately instead of believing her lies. You trusted family. That's not stupid. That's normal." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to testify truthfully about what happened to me. Serafina made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences." That evening, Elias showed up at Rowena's door. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, holding Silas against his chest like a small, vulnerable shield. "Mother, we need to talk." Rowena looked at her grandson for the first time, and her heart melted completely. A soft ache blooming in her chest. He was perfect, tiny and peaceful, sleeping against his father's chest, a miniature fist curled under his chin. This should have been the happiest moment of her life, finally meeting Silas. Instead, it was happening in the grim shadow of his mother's crimes. "He's beautiful, Elias. Mother, please." Serafina's looking at 20 years in prison. Silas needs his mother. Silas needs honest parents who don't commit felonies. She made mistakes, but she's not a monster. She's scared of not having enough money. She grew up poor and she panics about financial security. Elias's voice cracked, full of a raw, desperate love. Elias she stole from 6 different family members over 3 years. That's not panic. That's criminal behavior. Please just consider not testifying. Without your cooperation, the federal case falls apart. Rowena held out her arms for Silas, and Elias, with a reluctant sigh, handed him over. Her grandson was warm and solid and perfect smelling of milk and innocence. She'd driven 15 hours to meet him, only to be turned away at the hospital door by his criminal mother. Elias, answer me honestly. Did you know what Serafina was doing to other family members? No, I swear I didn't know about any of it. But you knew she was excluding me from the birth, while pretending I was welcome. Yes. And I should have stopped that. I should have stood up to her. You chose her over me, Elias. You chose to protect her lies instead of protecting me from fraud and humiliation. I love you, Mother, but she's my wife. She's the mother of my child. Rowena looked down at Silas, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Such an innocent little boy, born into such a complicated, poisoned situation. What happens to Silas if Serafina goes to prison? I don't know. I can't afford childcare and work full-time. My salary barely covers the mortgage. And there it was, the real reason for this visit. Elias wasn't just asking Rowena to protect Serafina from consequences. He was asking her to solve his childcare problems by allowing a federal crime to go unpunished. That sounds like something you should have considered before you married a criminal, Elias. Rowena handed Silas back to his father, the child. A warm, heavy weight in her arms. She walked to her front door. Her decision made firm and unyielding. Mother, please. Good night, Elias. Give my love to your son. As she closed the door behind them, Rowena knew that her relationship with Elias might never recover from this. But some things were more important than keeping peace in the family. Some things were worth fighting for, even when it meant standing alone. The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew. As Rowena walked toward the federal building in downtown Phoenix, Agent Hayes's words echoed in her mind. Due to the multi-state nature of Serafina's crimes, the case would be prosecuted in federal court rather than local, and that meant traveling to the regional facility for pre-trial proceedings. Serafina's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Rowena didn't have to be there. A witness wouldn't be called until trial. But she wanted to see Serafina's face when the full scope of her crimes was read aloud in open court. She needed to witness that moment of reckoning. The courtroom was nearly empty, a hush hanging in the air. Just the attorney's court staff, a few family members, and Rowena sitting in the back row, a silent observer. Serafina sat at the defendant's table, wearing an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled. She looked small and scared, a stark contrast to the confident woman who'd manipulated Rowena into driving 15 hours just to humiliate her. Elias sat in the front row, holding Silas, flanked by Serafina's parents who'd flown in from Seattle. None of them acknowledged Rowena's presence, though she saw Elias's shoulders tense visibly when she entered the room. The United States versus Serafina Marie Caldwell. The clerk announced, her voice flat and formal. Case number 2024, CR 11847. Federal prosecutor Sarah Vance stood up a file that seemed impossibly thick for someone Rowena had thought of as just her manipulative daughter-in-law. Your Honor, the defendant is charged with 6 counts of identity theft, 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of mail fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines. The government alleges that over a 36-month period, the defendant systematically targeted family members for financial exploitation, stealing over $47,000 and causing significant emotional and financial damage to the victims. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, reviewed the charges carefully. Ms. Caldwell, you're being represented by counsel today, Serafina's attorney. A young man who looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the case stood up. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Arthur Thorne, representing the defendant. Mr. Thorne, has your client been informed of the charges against her? She has, Your Honor. We're entering a plea of not guilty to all charges. Not guilty. Even with video footage of her submitting fraudulent documents and a mountain of digital evidence, Serafina was going to claim innocence. Rowena shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow she was. It was another layer of insult, another refusal to acknowledge the truth. Your Honor, Prosecutor Vance, continued, the government requests that the defendant remain in custody pending trial. Ms. Caldwell has demonstrated a pattern of deceptive behavior toward family members, and several victims have reported receiving threatening communications since her arrest. Threatening communications. Rowena wondered if that included the dozen voicemails Serafina had left on her phone over the past week, alternately begging for mercy and accusing Rowena of destroying her family. Mr. Thorne, your response. Your Honor. My client is a new mother with no prior criminal record. She has strong ties to the community and poses no flight risk. We request release on her own recognizance. The prosecutor stood again, her voice clear and cutting. Your Honor, the defendant committed identity theft against 6 family members across 4 states over 3 years. This shows sophisticated criminal planning and a willingness to exploit the people who trusted her most. Additionally, the defendant's crimes against victim Rowena Caldwell involved elaborate deception designed to maximize both financial damage and emotional trauma. Judge Morrison looked directly at Serafina, for the first time her gaze piercing. Ms. Caldwell, you defrauded your husband's mother. It was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I never intended. You forged her signature on legal documents while she was traveling across the country at your invitation to attend your child's birth. Serafina's attorney touched her arm, trying to get her to stop talking, but she continued, her voice rising in desperation. I was in labor, Your Honor. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just needed someone to take financial responsibility. And my mother-in-law has means. You excluded her from the birth after making her drive 15 hours to attend. That was a medical decision. My doctor recommended. Judge Morrison held up her hand, a gesture that immediately silenced Serafina. Ms. Caldwell, you're making this worse for yourself. Mr. Thorne, control your client. The judge reviewed the case file for another few minutes, while Serafina whispered urgently with her attorney, her face pale. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up, her expression stern. Given the sophisticated nature of these crimes, the pattern of behavior spanning multiple years, and the defendant's apparent inability to take responsibility for her actions, I'm denying bail. Ms. Caldwell will remain in federal custody pending trial. Serafina burst into tears, a dramatic gasping sound, but they looked calculated to Rowena. The same kind of manipulative crying she'd watched her use on Elias whenever she wanted something. Elias stood up from the gallery. Silas clutched tightly against his chest. Your Honor. She just had a baby. Our son needs his mother. Sir, please sit down. This is not the appropriate time for outbursts. But, Your Honor. Mr. Caldwell, sit down now, or I'll hold you in contempt. Elias sank back into his seat, clutching Silas tighter, his face a mask of bewildered grief. Serafina's mother was openly weeping, her face buried in her hands. Her father sat, stone-faced, staring at his daughter, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. As the court officers led Serafina away, she turned and looked directly at Rowena. For a brief, chilling moment, Rowena saw something in her eyes that wasn't manipulation or self-pity. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. After the hearing, Rowena walked out of the courthouse and sat on a bench across the street, watching Elias's family emerge. They stood on the courthouse steps for several minutes, probably arguing about what to do next. Finally, Serafina's parents got in their car and drove away without saying goodbye to Elias or Silas. The chasm in their family was widening, exposed for all to see. Rowena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope you're proud of yourself. You destroyed my daughter's life. It was signed, Serafina's mother. Rowena deleted the message without responding. Another text came immediately after. Silas will grow up without his mother because of your vindictiveness. Rowena turned off her phone and drove home, the words echoing in her mind. Vindictiveness. Was it vindictive to report crimes committed against her? Was it vindictive to refuse to help criminals escape consequences for their actions? Or was it vindictive to invite your mother-in-law to drive 15 hours out for her grandson's birth? Exclude her from the hospital? Forge her signature on financial documents and then try to manipulate her into silence when she discovered the fraud? The answer was stark, clear, and unwavering. That evening, she received a call from Agent Hayes. "Mrs. Caldwell, I wanted to update you on the case." Serafina's attorney reached out about a possible plea agreement. What kind of plea? Rowena asked, her voice betraying none of the apprehension she felt. Full restitution to all victims guilty. Pleas to reduced charges and a recommended sentence of 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3. What do you think, Agent Hayes? Honestly, I think she should take it. If this goes to trial and she's convicted on all charges, she's looking at 20 years minimum. But the decision isn't mine to make. What happens next? The prosecutor will present the plea offer to all 6 victims. If everyone agrees, Serafina can avoid trial. If anyone objects, we proceed to full prosecution. After hanging up, Rowena walked through her house, the silence amplifying her thoughts about justice versus mercy. Serafina had systematically stolen from family members who trusted her. She'd manipulated Rowena into one of the most humiliating experiences of her life. She'd shown no remorse until she got caught, and even then she was trying to blame everyone except herself. But she was also Silas's mother, and Elias was going to struggle as a single parent if she went to prison for 20 years. Her phone rang, Elias's name on the screen. "Mother, did Agent Hayes call you about the plea deal?" "She did. Will you accept it?" Rowena looked at the framed photo on her mantel taken during happier times, when Elias was small, a chubby-cheeked boy with a gap-toothed smile. She thought she understood how family relationships were supposed to work. "I need some time to think about it, Elias. Mother, please. 5 years is already a long time. Silas will be in kindergarten when she gets out. Your wife committed federal crimes against 6 people, Elias. 3 years seems like a pretty light sentence for that level of betrayal. But it's not just about Serafina. It's about Silas. It's about our family. Elias, our family stopped existing the moment Serafina decided to commit identity theft against me. What we have now is just the aftermath of her choices." Rowena hung up and sat in her quiet house, thinking about what justice should look like for a woman who'd used family love as a weapon against the people who trusted her most. The deadline for responding to the plea offer was Friday. She had 3 days to decide whether Serafina Caldwell deserved mercy or justice. And Rowena was discovering that sometimes the most loving thing you could do for someone was refuse to save them from the consequences of their own actions. Rowena rejected the plea deal on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Serafina's attorney, Arthur Thorne, was calling her personally to negotiate. That's when Rowena knew she'd made the right choice. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Arthur Thorne, Serafina's attorney. I understand you have concerns about the proposed plea agreement." Rowena was in her garden, deadheading roses, and enjoying the Arizona sunshine, the scent of blooming jasmine sweet on the air. "Mr. Thorne, I have concerns about your client committing federal crimes against my family. I appreciate your position, but I think you should consider the impact of a lengthy trial on your grandson." The media attention, the family stress. There it was. The familiar attempt to make Rowena responsible for the consequences of Serafina's choices. "Mr. Thorne, my grandson's well-being should have been Serafina's priority before she decided to become a career criminal. Mrs. Caldwell, I think there may be some information that could change your perspective on this case." Something in his tone. A nervous tremor made Rowena stop pruning her shears, hovering above a wilting bloom. What kind of information? Could we meet in person? There are complications in this case that the prosecutor may not have shared with you. 2 hours later, Rowena sat across from Arthur Thorne in his downtown Phoenix office. He looked even more nervous up close, constantly adjusting his tie and avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Caldwell, what I'm about to tell you is confidential attorney-client information that Serafina has authorized me to share in hopes of reaching a resolution. I'm listening. Serafina's crimes weren't entirely her own idea. She was being coerced. Rowena almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Coerced by whom? Her previous husband. Serafina was married before she met Elias to a man named Marcus Thorne. Their divorce was complicated. Thorne pulled out a file folder, his hands trembling slightly. Marcus Thorne is a professional con artist with a history of sophisticated financial fraud schemes. He trained Serafina in identity theft techniques and forced her to target her new family after she remarried. Forced her how? Blackmail. Marcus has compromising information about Serafina's past that could destroy her marriage to Elias and her relationship with your family. Rowena stared at Thorne, trying to process this absurd yet vaguely plausible story. So Serafina committed federal crimes against 6 family members because her ex-husband made her do it, essentially. Yes. She's been sending Marcus half of everything she stole to keep him from revealing her secrets. What secrets? Thorne hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. Serafina has a criminal record from before she met Elias. Identity theft fraud, several other charges. She served 18 months in prison in Oregon before moving to Colorado and reinventing herself. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls closing in. Elias didn't know about this. No one knew. Serafina had changed her last name, moved states, and created an entirely new identity when she met Elias. Marcus had discovered her new life and had been exploiting her ever since. Rowena sat back in her chair, her mind racing. If this was true, it meant Serafina wasn't just a desperate new mother who'd made bad decisions. She was a career criminal with an extensive history of fraud, who'd lied about her entire identity to marry Rowena's son, Mr. Thorne. Why are you telling me this? Because Serafina is terrified that if this goes to trial, Marcus will surface as a witness and reveal everything. She's more afraid of Elias discovering her past than she is of going to prison. And you think this information should make me more sympathetic to her? I think it explains why she made the choices she did. Serafina isn't the master criminal the prosecutor is portraying. She's a victim herself. Rowena stood up, gathering her purse. Mr. Thorne, let me see if I understand this correctly. Your client is a convicted felon who lied about her identity, married my son under false pretenses, committed crimes against his family while being blackmailed by her criminal ex-husband. And you think this makes her more sympathetic? Mrs. Caldwell, please. The only thing this information tells me is that Serafina is a more sophisticated criminal than I realized, and that my son has been living with a complete stranger for 5 years. Please just consider. I'm considering calling Elias immediately to warn him that he's married to a convicted felon. Thorne stood up quickly, his face paling. Mrs. Caldwell, that would violate attorney-client privilege. I shared this information in confidence. You shared it, hoping I'd feel sorry for your client. Instead, you've convinced me that she's even more dangerous than I thought. Rowena walked toward the door, then turned back. A chilling thought forming in her mind. Mr. Thorne, when this goes to trial, make sure the prosecutor knows about Marcus Thorne. If Serafina's been sending stolen money to a known criminal, that's another federal crime she can be charged with. Mrs. Caldwell, please. Good day, Mr. Thorne. Rowena drove home in a daze. Serafina wasn't just her daughter-in-law who'd made bad decisions. She was a career criminal who'd infiltrated Rowena's family under false pretenses. Elias had no idea who he'd really married. Silas had been born to a woman who'd been lying about her identity since before she met his father. Her phone was ringing when she walked in the door. Elias's name on the screen. Mother Seraphina's attorney said you met with him today. His voice was strained, on the edge of panic. I did. He said you're still refusing the plea deal. That's correct. Mother, please. Seraphina's already facing 5 years in prison. How is that not enough? Rowena sat down at her kitchen table and stared at the framed photo of Elias's graduation from college, back when she thought she understood who her family was, what their foundations were built upon. Elias, did Seraphina ever tell you about her life before she moved to Colorado? Of course. She grew up in Seattle, went to college in Oregon, worked in retail management before we met. Why? Did she ever mention being married before? Silence. Then a bewildered whisper. What are you talking about? Did she ever mention a criminal record? Mother, what the hell is going on? Elias's voice rose, edged with raw fear. Elias? I think you need to sit down, and you might want to arrange for someone to watch Silas while we talk. As Rowena prepared to destroy her son's understanding of his wife and the mother of his child, she realized that Seraphina's crimes against her were just the beginning. The real crime was what she'd done to Elias, building their entire relationship on an elaborate lie that was about to come crashing down. Elias's silence on the phone stretched so long, Rowena thought the call had dropped. Elias, are you still there? Criminal record. His voice was barely a whisper, thin and reedy with shock. Mother. What are you talking about? Seraphina served 18 months in prison in Oregon for identity theft and fraud before she moved to Colorado and met you. That's impossible. I would have known. She changed her name and created a new identity. Elias, her attorney, told me this afternoon. She's not who you think she is. Rowena heard Silas crying in the background, and Elias's voice became muffled as he tried to comfort his son, while simultaneously processing the devastating information that his wife was a stranger. Mother, how do you know this? How can this be true? Her attorney told me she's been blackmailed by her ex-husband, a man named Marcus Thorne, who's also a professional criminal. She's been stealing from our family and sending half the money to him to keep him quiet about her past. The crying in the background stopped, and Rowena could hear Elias moving around, probably going somewhere private to continue the conversation. Jesus Christ. Mother, are you sure about this? Elias. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Seraphina has been lying to you about everything since the day you met. Her background, her family situation, her reasons for moving to Colorado, all of it. But I have met her parents. I've talked to her sister. Did you meet people? She introduced as her parents and sister. Another long pause, filled with the static of a world imploding. Rowena could practically hear Elias's carefully constructed reality crashing down around him. Mother, what am I supposed to do with this information? You need to protect yourself and Silas. If Seraphina has been living under a false identity, there could be serious financial implications, legal problems even, immigration issues. Immigration issues? Elias repeated, his voice incredulous. Elias, you don't know who she really is. You have no idea what other secrets she's hiding. I need to confront her. She's in federal custody, Elias. You can't just show up and demand answers. Then I need to hire my own attorney. I need to find out what else she's lied about. That's probably a good idea, Mother. If this is all true, if she's been lying about everything, then Silas and I are both victims of her fraud. Yes, you are. She made me complicit in excluding you from Silas's birth. She made me choose sides between my wife and my mother when I should have been protecting both of you from her lies. Rowena heard the pain in his voice, raw and unvarnished, and wished she could take it away. But Elias needed to understand the full scope of what Seraphina had done to their family. There's something else, Elias. What? According to her attorney, Seraphina is more afraid of you discovering her past than she is of going to prison. She'd rather serve 20 years than have you know who she really is. Well, it's too late for that now. Elias? I want you to think about something. If Serafina has been stealing from family members and sending money to her ex-husband, what else has she been lying about? Your finances, your legal status as a married couple. Silas's paternity? Mother, don't. I can't even think about that right now. I know it's horrible, but you need to consider all possibilities. You need to protect yourself and Silas. After hanging up with Elias, Rowena sat in her quiet house, the silence amplifying the weight of Serafina's lies. How many lives had she destroyed? Not just the 6 family members she'd stolen from, but Elias, who'd married a stranger, Silas, who'd been born into a web of deception, and even Serafina's fake family, who'd been playing roles in her elaborate fiction. Her phone rang again. Agent Hayes. Mrs. Caldwell. I just got some interesting information from Serafina's attorney. Apparently, she's been cooperative about providing details on her accomplice, Marcus Thorne, her ex-husband. According to Serafina, Thorne has been running similar blackmail schemes against other women across the western states. She's agreed to provide evidence against him in exchange for consideration at sentencing. What kind of evidence? Financial records, communication logs, details about his other victims. If Serafina's information leads to Thorne's arrest, it could significantly impact her own sentence. Agent Hayes. Can I ask you something? Did you know about Serafina's criminal record in Oregon? We discovered that during our background investigation, yes. Serafina Caldwell isn't her real name. What is her real name? Jennifer Thorne. She was married to Marcus Thorne when she committed her first series of identity theft crimes in Oregon. Their divorce was part of a plea agreement where she testified against him, but he was acquitted on a technicality. Jennifer Thorne. Rowena's daughter-in-law's real name was Jennifer Thorne, and she'd been lying about her identity for the entire 5 years she'd been married to Elias. Agent Hayes. What happens to my son? Legally, if his wife has been living under a false identity, is their marriage even legal? That's a complicated question that would depend on Colorado state law and the specific circumstances of their marriage. Your son should definitely consult with a family law attorney. And what about my grandson? Birth certificate issues can usually be resolved through the courts. But again, your son needs legal representation. After ending the call, Rowena realized that Jennifer's crimes had created a legal nightmare that would take years to untangle. Elias's marriage might not be legal. Silas's birth certificate might be fraudulent. Their finances could be compromised. Their entire life together had been built on lies, and now it was all crumbling. Her doorbell rang at 8:30 p.m. Through the peephole, she could see Elias standing on her front porch, holding Silas and a large duffel bag. Elias, what are you doing here? Mother, can Silas and I stay here tonight? I can't be in that house right now. Everything in it reminds me of the lies she told me. Rowena opened the door and wrapped her son and grandson in the biggest hug she'd given in months. Of course you can stay for as long as you need. As she helped Elias settle Silas in her guest room, Rowena realized that Jennifer's attempt to destroy their family had actually brought Elias and her closer together. Her lies and manipulation had backfired completely. But Rowena also knew that the worst was yet to come. Because if Jennifer Thorne had been living under a false identity for 5 years, there were probably other secrets waiting to be discovered. And some of those secrets might be dangerous enough to threaten the safety of her son and grandson. The trial of Jennifer Thorne, née Serafina Caldwell, began on a cold Monday morning in February. The federal courthouse in Phoenix was busier than Rowena had expected, with news vans parked outside, and reporters interviewing anyone willing to talk about the case. Agent Hayes had warned her that Jennifer's case had attracted media attention because of the sophisticated nature of her identity fraud and the chilling fact that she'd victimized her own family members. Family fraud cases always get coverage, she'd explained. People want to understand how someone can betray the people who trust them most. Elias and Rowena arrived together, leaving Silas with Rowena's neighbor, Mrs. Albright. Elias had been staying with Rowena for 3 weeks now, and they had developed a comfortable routine. He'd wake up early to feed Silas while Rowena made coffee. They'd share breakfast and discuss the day's courtroom strategy, then drive downtown together. "You ready for this?" Elias asked as they walked up the courthouse steps, his hand resting briefly on her arm. "Are you?" Rowena replied, seeing the weariness etched around his eyes. "I still can't believe I was married to someone whose real name I didn't even know." Elias's attorney had confirmed that his marriage to Jennifer Thorne was legally valid, despite her false identity, but the emotional betrayal was devastating. He'd also learned that Jennifer had been lying about her job, her education, and even her relationship with her supposed family in Seattle. "Mother. I keep thinking about all the times she talked about her childhood, her parents, her college experience. All of it was lies. Every single story. Elias, you couldn't have known. She was a professional deceiver." Inside the courtroom, Rowena was surprised by how crowded it was. Besides the 6 victim families, there were reporters, law enforcement officials, and what looked like other potential victims who'd come forward since Jennifer's arrest, drawn by the grim spectacle. Jennifer sat at the defendant's table, wearing a conservative blue dress, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nothing like the confident woman who'd manipulated their family for years. She looked small, defeated, and much older than her 32 years. "All rise for the Honourable Judge Patricia Morrison." As the trial began, prosecutor Sarah Vance painted a picture of Jennifer Thorne that was even more disturbing than Rowena had imagined. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant is not who she claims to be. Jennifer Thorne has spent the last 8 years living under a false identity, committing identity theft across multiple states and destroying the lives of people who trusted her most." Vance explained that Jennifer had been arrested in Oregon in 2016 for identity theft and fraud, served 18 months in prison, then disappeared after her release. She'd created the identity of Serafina Caldwell using stolen documents and had moved to Colorado specifically to find new victims. The defendant didn't just steal money from her victims. She stole their sense of security, their trust in family relationships, and their belief that the people closest to them, bobbing, were who they claimed to be. Jennifer's attorney, Arthur Thorne, attempted to portray his client as a victim of circumstance. Jennifer Thorne made mistakes, serious mistakes, but she was driven to these actions by fear and desperation. Her ex-husband, Marcus Thorne, is a dangerous criminal who threatened her safety and forced her into criminal activity through blackmail and intimidation. But when Vance cross-examined Jennifer the next day, the carefully constructed victim narrative fell apart completely. "Miss Thorne, you testified that Marcus Thorne forced you to steal from your husband's family, is that correct?" "Yes. He threatened to tell Elias about my past if I didn't send him money." "But you were already stealing from family members before Marcus Thorne contacted you, weren't you?" Jennifer hesitated, her gaze darting nervously around the courtroom. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm referring to the credit card fraud you committed against Elias's sister, Ilara Caldwell, in March 2022. Marcus Thorne didn't contact you until June 2022, according to your own testimony." Jennifer's face went pale, a sickly white. That was different. That was a mistake." "A mistake. You opened 4 credit cards in Ilara Caldwell's name, spent $8,000 and made no payments for 6 months. That was a mistake." Vance's voice was sharp, disbelieving. "I was going to pay it back," Jennifer insisted, her voice rising. "Just like you were going to pay back the $2,300 hospital bill you fraudulently assigned to Rowena Caldwell. I was in labor. I wasn't thinking clearly." Vance pulled out a document, a cold, hard piece of evidence. "Miss Thorne, this is a transcript of your phone call with Rowena Caldwell 3 days before you gave birth, inviting her to drive from Arizona to Colorado for the delivery. Did Marcus Thorne force you to make that call?" "No, But did Marcus Thorne force you to exclude Rowena Caldwell from the hospital after she drove 15 hours to be there? No. Did Marcus Thorne force you to forge Rowena Caldwell's signature on financial documents while she was traveling to see her grandson? No. But you don't understand the pressure I was under. Vance walked closer to the witness stand, her voice unwavering. Miss Thorne, isn't it true that you invited Rowena Caldwell to Colorado specifically so you could manipulate her into being financially responsible for your delivery? That's not, I didn't plan it that way. Isn't it true that you researched Rowena Caldwell's financial status before inviting her to the birth? Jennifer didn't answer, her mouth a thin, tight line. The courtroom was completely silent, the tension almost unbearable. Elias grabbed Rowena's hand, his face white with shock. Ms. Thorne, we have evidence that you accessed Rowena Caldwell's credit reports and bank statements 2 weeks before your son was born. Did Marcus Thorne force you to do that financial research? No, Jennifer whispered, barely audible. No, he didn't force me to research her finances. So you planned to defraud Rowena Caldwell before you ever invited her to Colorado, didn't you? I thought she could afford it. She has money. Ms. Thorne, you planned to humiliate and defraud your husband's mother because you thought she could afford to be victimized. Jennifer started crying again, a fresh deluge of tears, but her sobs looked as calculated as her earlier ones. You don't understand what it's like to be scared all the time. Scared of what, Ms. Thorne, being honest with your husband about who you really are? Yes, scared of getting a job to pay your own bills. It's not that simple. Ms. Thorne, you stole from 6 family members over 3 years. You lived under a false identity. You excluded your mother-in-law from her grandson's birth after making her travel across 2 states. And you did all of this because you were scared of being honest. Is that your testimony? Yes. Vance turned to the jury, her gaze sweeping over them. Ladies and gentlemen, fear of honesty is not a defense for federal crimes. As Jennifer was led back to the defendant's table, she looked directly at Rowena for the first time since the trial began. And what Rowena saw in her eyes wasn't remorse or regret. It was pure distilled hatred, the same expression she'd worn when the court officers led her away from the preliminary hearing. Jennifer Thorne wasn't a victim. She wasn't a desperate mother who'd made poor choices. She was a predator who targeted Rowena's family because she thought they were easy marks. And Rowena had a chilling feeling that the worst revelations were still to come. On Thursday morning of the second week of trial, Prosecutor Vance called a witness. Rowena hadn't been expecting Detective Alistair Finch from the Oregon State Police. Detective Finch, can you tell the jury about your investigation into Jennifer Thorne in 2016? Certainly. Ms. Thorne was arrested as part of a larger investigation into an identity theft ring operating throughout the Pacific Northwest. She was one of 8 defendants in a case involving over $200,000 in fraudulent charges. Vance pulled up a photograph on the courtroom monitor displaying a gaunt, tattooed man with cold, calculating eyes. Do you recognize the man in this photograph? Yes, that's Marcus Thorne. Jennifer Thorne's husband at the time. He was the ringleader of the operation. Can you describe the nature of their criminal partnership? Marcus Thorne recruited vulnerable women, typically those with financial difficulties or emotional problems, and trained them to commit identity theft. Jennifer was his most successful partner. Rowena felt Elias's hand tighten around hers, a desperate squeeze. Jennifer hadn't been a victim of Marcus Thorne's manipulation. She'd been his criminal partner, Detective Finch. What made Jennifer Thorne particularly effective at identity theft? She had a natural ability to gain people's trust and access their personal information. She was charming, sympathetic, and able to convince people to share details they would normally keep private, like social security numbers and financial information. Exactly. Jennifer would befriend elderly women, single mothers, people going through divorces, anyone who was emotionally vulnerable. She'd offer help and support while gathering the information she needed to steal their identities. Vance showed another document to the jury, a long, scrolling list. Detective Finch. This is a list of Jennifer Thorne's victims, some is from 2016. How many people did she defraud? 14 victims over an 18-month period. Total losses exceeded $85,000. 14 victims. Rowena had thought Jennifer's crimes against their family were her first attempts at fraud. But she'd been a career criminal long before she met Elias. Detective Finch. What happened to Marcus Thorne? He was acquitted when Jennifer Thorne agreed to testify against him as part of her plea agreement. However, we suspected that she didn't provide truthful testimony. What do you mean? Jennifer claimed that Marcus forced her to commit the crimes, that she was an unwilling participant, but our investigation suggested that she was an equal partner who enjoyed the criminal lifestyle. Vance turned to face Jennifer at the defendant's table, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. Detective Finch. After Jennifer Thorne was released from prison in 2018, did she maintain contact with Marcus Thorne? Yes. Our surveillance showed that they continued their romantic relationship and their criminal partnership. The divorce was fake, designed to help Jennifer establish a new identity. The courtroom erupted in whispers, a cacophony of shocked murmurs. Jennifer and Marcus were still married. Jennifer's marriage to Elias was bigamous. Detective Finch, is Jennifer Thorne still married to Marcus Thorne? As far as we can determine, yes. There's no record of their divorce ever being finalized. Elias made a choking sound beside Rowena, a strangled gasp. He'd been living with a woman who was married to someone else. Someone who was running a criminal enterprise that included defrauding Elias's family. Detective Finch. Do you believe Jennifer Thorne moved to Colorado to continue her criminal activities? Objection. Arthur Thorne called out, springing to his feet. Sustained. Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. Detective Finch, based on your investigation, would you characterize Jennifer Thorne as a victim or a perpetrator? Vance rephrased, her gaze fixed on the detective. Jennifer Thorne is one of the most sophisticated identity thieves I've encountered in 20 years of law enforcement. She's not a victim. She's a predator who targets people's emotions and relationships to commit financial crimes. When Detective Finch stepped down, Rowena realized that everything they'd believed about Jennifer was wrong. She wasn't a desperate mother or a victim of an abusive ex-husband. She was a career criminal who'd infiltrated their family as part of a larger criminal operation. During the lunch break, Elias and Rowena sat in the courthouse cafeteria. Elias struggling to process the revelation that his marriage was illegal and his wife was a professional criminal. His face was grey, hollowed out by the shock. Mother Silas isn't legally my son. The words were a flat statement of utter despair. What do you mean? Rowena asked, though a cold dread was already gripping her heart. If Jennifer is still married to Marcus Thorne, then her marriage to me is invalid, which means Silas was born to a married woman who was living with someone else. Legally, Marcus Thorne might be considered Silas's father. Rowena hadn't thought of that implication, the sickening twist of it. Silas's entire legal status was now in question because of his mother's lies. Elias, we'll figure this out. You'll always be Silas's father regardless of what the paperwork says. But what if Marcus Thorne tries to claim parental rights? What if he uses Silas to get leverage against us? Before Rowena could answer, Agent Hayes approached their table, her expression grim. Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell, I need to speak with you privately. They followed her to a conference room down the hall, the quiet space feeling suddenly oppressive. We've received some disturbing information about Marcus Thorne. He's been arrested in Seattle for running a similar scheme involving identity theft and family fraud. Similar how Rowena asked her voice, barely a whisper. He's been placing female accomplices in relationships with wealthy men, having them gather financial information and commit fraud against the men's families. Elias's face went white, utterly drained of color. Jennifer wasn't the only one. No, we've identified at least 6 women across 5 states who were working for Marcus Thorne. They'd establish relationships with financially stable men, marry them or move in with them, then systematically defraud their families and friends, Agent Hayes Rowena said slowly, a horrifying realization dawning on her. Are you telling us that Jennifer targeted Elias specifically because she thought our family had money? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Jennifer researched your family for months before she moved to Colorado. She knew Elias's profession, his family connections, and your financial status before they ever met. Elias put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Our entire relationship was a lie. She never loved me. She never wanted a family. It was all just a criminal operation. Elias. Agent Hayes continued, her voice softer now, filled with genuine regret. There's something else. Jennifer and Marcus have been planning to disappear with Silas after she gave birth. They wanted to take your son and use him as leverage to extort money from your family. Extort money? How Rowena gasped, the air catching in her throat. Kidnapping for ransom. Essentially, they would have demanded payment for Silas's safe return. Rowena felt like the floor was dropping out from under her, a sickening abyss opening up. Jennifer hadn't just committed identity theft. She'd planned to kidnap her grandson and hold him for ransom. Agent Hayes, where is Marcus Thorne now? In federal custody in Seattle. He's been charged with conspiracy, identity theft, fraud, and kidnapping conspiracy. Kidnapping conspiracy? Elias looked up, his eyes bloodshot. We found detailed plans for taking Silas and demanding $500,000 from your family for his return. They'd researched your assets, your property values, your retirement accounts. They knew exactly how much they thought you could pay. Elias looked up at Rowena, tears streaming down his face. Mother, they were going to kidnap Silas and make you pay ransom for your own grandson. As they prepared to return to the courthouse for the afternoon session, Rowena realized that Jennifer's crimes were even worse than they'd imagined. She hadn't just stolen money from them. She'd infiltrated their family, planned to destroy their relationships, and ultimately intended to kidnap Silas and hold him for ransom. But Jennifer Thorne had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the grandmother she'd tried to humiliate and defraud. And now it was time for her to learn exactly how expensive that mistake was going to be. The final day of Jennifer Thorne's trial brought a revelation that no one in the courtroom was prepared for, including Rowena. Agent Hayes took the witness stand, looking grimmer than Rowena had ever seen her. Agent Hayes, can you tell the jury about the evidence recovered from Marcus Thorne's apartment in Seattle? We recovered extensive documentation of what Mr. Thorne called family infiltration operations. These included detailed profiles of target families, financial research, and operational plans for each of his accomplices. Vance handed her a thick folder, its contents clearly disturbing. Agent Hayes, did you find documentation related to the Caldwell family specifically? Yes. Marcus Thorne had been researching the Caldwell family for over 2 years before Jennifer made contact with Elias Caldwell. 2 years before Jennifer even moved to Colorado. Yes. The plan to target the Caldwell family was developed long before Jennifer and Elias met. Vance walked to the evidence table and picked up a large poster board displaying a meticulously detailed family tree complete with financial annotations. Agent Hayes, what did Marcus Thorne's research reveal about the Caldwell family? He identified Elias Caldwell as an ideal target because of his stable income, his lack of criminal sophistication, and what Thorne characterized as exploitable family dynamics. What did Thorne mean by exploitable family dynamics? Agent Hayes looked directly at Rowena, her gaze conveying a profound apology. Thorne identified Rowena Caldwell as what he called a high-value secondary target because of her financial assets and her emotional attachment to family relationships. Rowena felt cold all over, a chill that seeped into her bones. Marcus Thorne hadn't just researched Elias. He'd specifically studied her, looking for ways to exploit her love for her family, her deepest vulnerabilities. Agent Hayes, what was the ultimate goal of this operation? According to Thorne's documentation, The plan was to have Jennifer establish a relationship with Elias, gain access to family financial information, commit systematic fraud against all family members, and then disappear with any children born during the relationship. Disappear how? Thorne had detailed plans for fake deaths. Jennifer was supposed to stage her own death and Silas's death in a car accident, then disappear with Thorne and the child. This would have allowed them to collect life insurance payments while maintaining control of Silas for future extortion schemes. The courtroom was completely silent, the air thick with disbelief and horror. Jennifer had planned to fake her own death and Silas's death, letting Elias grieve for his supposedly deceased wife and child, while she lived somewhere else with Thorne and Silas collecting on life insurance. Agent Hayes, were there life insurance policies involved? Vance asked, her voice low. Yes. Jennifer had taken out substantial life insurance policies on herself and Silas, with Elias as the beneficiary. The premiums were being paid with money stolen from family members. Vance turned to face the jury. Her expression hardened. So Jennifer Thorne was stealing from the Caldwell family to pay for life insurance policies that she planned to collect fraudulently after faking her own death and kidnapping Silas. That's correct. Elias was trembling beside Rowena, his face pale and drawn. Jennifer hadn't just planned to steal from them. She'd planned to destroy Elias emotionally by making him believe his wife and child were dead, while she lived comfortably somewhere else with Silas and the insurance money. Agent Hayes. What prevented this plan from being executed? Rowena Caldwell's decision to report the hospital bill fraud initiated an investigation that uncovered the entire operation before Jennifer could stage the fake deaths. Vance smiled a tight, grim expression. So Mrs. Caldwell's refusal to pay a fraudulent bill saved her grandson's life, and possibly her son's life. According to Thorne's notes, if Elias had become suspicious or uncooperative, he was also targeted for elimination. Jennifer's attorney, Arthur Thorne, sprang to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is highly prejudicial. Overruled. The witness may continue. Judge Morrison's voice was firm. Agent Hayes pulled out another document, grimly. Marcus Thorne's operational notes include specific plans for making Elias Caldwell's death appear accidental if he discovered the truth about Jennifer's identity. Rowena grabbed Elias's hand as the full, horrifying scope of Jennifer's plan became sickeningly clear. She hadn't just targeted their family for financial fraud. She'd planned to psychologically destroy Elias' kidnapped Silas, possibly murder Elias if necessary, and steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process. Agent Hayes. In your professional opinion, what would have happened to the Caldwell family if Rowena Caldwell had not reported the fraudulent hospital bill? Based on Thorne's timeline, Jennifer would have staged her death and Silas's death within 6 months of his birth. Elias would have grieved for his supposedly deceased family, while Jennifer and Thorne collected insurance money and prepared Silas for future criminal operations. Thorne's notes indicate that Silas would have been raised to become part of the family infiltration operation when he reached adulthood. He would have been trained to target wealthy families, just like his mother did. My grandson had been destined to become a criminal from birth, raised by people who'd kidnapped him and forced him to commit crimes against innocent families. The thought was a sickening punch to Rowena's heart. Vance turned to face Jennifer at the defendant's table, her voice ringing with cold authority. Ms. Thorne, do you still maintain that you were a victim forced into criminal activity by your ex-husband? Jennifer, who had been staring at the table throughout Agent Hayes's testimony, now looked up, her eyes glinting with the coldest expression Rowena had ever seen. No, she said quietly, her voice devoid of any pretense. I don't. Miss Thorne, do you have anything to say to the Caldwell family? Jennifer stood up, ignoring her attorney's frantic attempts to pull her back down. Yes, I do. She turned to face Elias and Rowena directly, her gaze lingering on Rowena, venomous and unrepentant. You people thought you were so smart, So careful, so loving, but you were just marks, easy targets who deserved what happened to them. Ms. Swan. Judge Morrison warned, her voice rising. I advise you to. Elias Jennifer sneered. Cutting off the judge, you were pathetic, so desperate for love that you never questioned anything I told you. So trusting that you handed over your entire life to a stranger. Elias's face was white, but he didn't look away. His eyes locked on hers, and Rowena Jennifer's voice became pure venom, laced with chilling triumph. You were the perfect target, a lonely old woman with money who was so desperate to be needed by her family that you'd pay any price for acceptance. You were just a means to an end. Miss Thorne, sit down now. Judge Morrison ordered her gavel, slamming down. The only thing I regret is getting caught before I could finish what we started. You have no idea how satisfying it would have been to watch Elias grieve for his dead wife and child, while I lived comfortably somewhere else with Silas and your money. Two court officers moved swiftly toward Jennifer as she continued her chilling rant, her voice a triumphant shriek. Silas would have grown up to be just like me. Smart, ruthless, and completely unsentimental about family bonds. He would have been perfect for this work. Remove the defendant. Judge Morrison ordered, her face a mask of furious disbelief. As the officers led Jennifer away, struggling against her, she called back over her shoulder, her voice piercing the courtroom's shock. Rowena, you may have won this round, but there are others like me out there, and you'll never feel safe again. The courtroom remained silent for several minutes after Jennifer was finally removed, the echo of her words hanging in the air like a noxious gas. Finally, Judge Morrison addressed the jury, her voice strained. Ladies and gentlemen, you will disregard the defendant's outburst. Please base your verdict solely on the evidence presented. But everyone in that courtroom had seen who Jennifer Thorne really was. Not a victim, not a desperate mother, but a calculating predator who'd viewed Rowena's family as nothing more than financial resources to be exploited. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, his voice clear and resonant as he delivered the verdict. On all counts of identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and kidnapping conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Morrison sentenced Jennifer Thorne to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As they left the courthouse, Elias carrying Silas against his chest, a soft, warm bundle of innocence. Rowena realized that Jennifer's plan had backfired completely. She'd tried to destroy their family, but her crimes had actually brought Elias and Rowena closer together than they'd been in years. Mother Elias said as they walked to the car, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. I don't know how to thank you. For what? For refusing to let her get away with it. If you'd just paid that hospital bill and stayed quiet, Silas and I would probably be dead by now while she collected insurance money. Rowena looked at her grandson sleeping peacefully in his father's arms, completely unaware that his mother had planned to kidnap him and raise him to be a criminal. Elias, the only thing Jennifer was right about is that there are others like her out there. But she was wrong about one thing. What's that? Elias asked, his gaze meeting hers. I'll never feel unsafe again, Elias. Because now I know exactly what predators look like, and I know I'm strong enough to fight them. As they drove home through the Arizona sunset, Silas babbling happily in his car seat, Rowena realized that Jennifer Thorne had given her something she'd never intended to give. The profound, unwavering knowledge that she could protect her family from anyone who tried to hurt them. And if another predator ever targeted her family, they'd learn the same harsh lesson Jennifer had learned. Some grandmothers are too smart, too stubborn, and too loving to be easy victims. In the quiet aftermath of turmoil, Rowena found a profound truth etched into the landscape of her life. It wasn't about the money or the charges, or even the grand triumph over a calculated enemy. It was about standing firm in one's own worth, even when the world, and indeed one's own kin, conspired to diminish it. Rowena's journey through deceit and betrayal had been arduous, but it forged within her an unshakable core of self-respect. She had refused to be a victim not out of vindictiveness, but out of a deeper commitment to justice and the preservation of her family's true essence. Her story is a stark reminder that the deepest wounds often come from those closest to us, those who see our vulnerabilities not as sacred trust, but as opportunities for exploitation. Yet it is in confronting these betrayals, in refusing to let them define us as, that we discover an inherent strength we never knew we possessed. Rowena learned that true family isn't about blood alone, but about honesty, respect, and unconditional love, values that must be defended fiercely. She also learned that sometimes the most loving act is to allow consequences to unfold, not to punish, but to teach. If you saw yourself in Rowena's story, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the quiet call to stand up for yourself, know that your resilience is your greatest asset. May you find the courage to protect your own sacred boundaries, and may your journey lead you to a peace that is earned, cherished, and deeply deserved. The end.